Hi.
Hey there. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. It's
Yeah.
crazy. So, yeah, I've
So,
actually never done anything like that. I mean, I've done interviews for music before, but I've actually never done an interview about like anything else. So this is very exciting.
well, this is a big deal for me. It's a big deal for you, and I think a lot of people are going to get help out of this. I really do. I
I hope
think
so.
this is what happens whenever I do interviews. There's people that, C.S. Lewis said, friendship happens at the moment one person says to another, "Wow, you too." And what's going to happen is that people are going to come out of the woodwork here. They're actually going to show up. They're going to watch this and they're going to show up and say, that's my story. People who've been quiet, so I think
Yeah.
in a very weird kind of way, this is a ministry and just a YouTube channel that it's a
Right.
ministry disguised as a YouTube channel.
I like it. I'm all about it.
Hello, my friendly acquaintances. Today, my special guest is Jenny Hayworth. Jenny and I, how we met was when I did a video on widowers and their unique journey that they are on. And Jenny made a comment under the widower video, and I asked her to email me. It was a very poignant comment, and I felt it was necessary to continue the conversation. And since then, we developed a friendly acquaintance, and I just felt that it was important for you, my audience, to meet Jenny. So welcome, Jenny, to this platform. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. A little nervous, but excited.
So without me paraphrasing anything that you said, if you could sum up your experience, starting with your comment, your first comment to my widower video, and then our conversation after that, just go for it. Take the stage.
Okay. Well, I was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in late October of this year, or of 2022, rather. And as these diagnoses go, the first couple months, you're sort of in this like weird denial about what's going on. Like you're like, okay, yeah, I have stage 4 cancer. What does that mean? Who knows? And if I die, whatever. Everybody will be fine. And then, so that would be, I guess, like in the 5 stages of grief, which is actually applies to people who have a terminal diagnosis. The 5 stages of grief was never intended to apply to people who have lost someone. And I think that's interesting because I know a lot of people who are in grief from losing someone. The 5 stages of grief is very frustrating for them because it's not actually for them. It doesn't actually apply, apparently. So the first stage is denial, right? And then I think I was kind of living in that world of denial about what this meant for my family, for my husband, and for me and my kind of my legacy, which there's something very like a Christian. I'm a Catholic, and we talk about a lifelong Catholic, and that implies that somebody's living to a decent old age. And I think the idea is you need that time, you need that arc to get to a place spiritually where you can meet God. And when I was diagnosed, I was 41. I have 6 children. My oldest is 14. My youngest is 2. They were, 13 and 1 at the time. And I realized that my adult life and my married life had been sort of a never-ending struggle between, not a struggle, I mean, that's the wrong word, but that I was always kind of in survival mode. I was always pregnant. I was always breastfeeding. I was always, trying to negotiate family life. And I was looking forward to a time when we could kind of rest on our, like under our grapevine, I guess, under our vine and look at these children that we had brought into the world and our grandchildren. And so it suddenly hit me that if I die young, which we actually don't know, and we have reason to hope, especially with breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer, is solidly moving into a chronic illness, and there's a lot of new therapies. So I'm not saying I'm going to die anytime soon. We don't know that at all. And my doctor actually has not given me a date or anything. I mean, she hasn't given me a prognosis or anything. She's very hopeful. But I think realizing that my own mortality and thinking about what that means to be the first wife for my husband. And I know a few widows, a few widowers, and I don't have any kind of window into how they really feel after their spouse passes away. But it does seem that, especially with widowers, once a new wife moves in, the former wife is sort of forgotten about, and it's almost like a point of contention for the new wife. Like there's jealousy, there's kind of a demand to forget. And I could be making that up, I don't know. But it's certainly something I've seen on the internet, especially with second wives. And it suddenly dawned on me that I might be buried in my own grave alone and essentially forgotten about. I mean, my older children would obviously remember me, but my 1-year-old, my 4-year-old, I mean, those kids will have a very spotty memory, and that all of those memories are solidly in my husband's hands, and my family is in his hands because he is the custodial parent at that point. And what will that relationship look like? And so I was looking up on YouTube about widowers and how they really feel about their deceased wives. And I came across your video, and then I wrote this very emotional post, which is not on your page anymore, I don't think. I don't know. I don't remember if I removed it. I must have, but
Yeah, you might have, because I was just going to look
about
for
those
it right now.
fears.
I was just going to look for it, and then
I know I couldn't find it.
yeah,
I couldn't find it, but it was a place of I think in that moment, because I did enter into like a very deep depression about this, and I was very upset about the idea of another woman coming into my husband's life, and I think in some sense it feels that she would be preferred to me because of our life circumstances, because I'm unhealthy, and again, I've always been pregnant, I've always been breastfeeding. It's always been this sort of like, whoa, like what's going on with this? This is this constant change. There hasn't been a lot of resting in our marriage. We haven't had a lot of time alone together. We have 6 children, and so I had this fear of a more mature woman that maybe didn't have any of the kind of struggles that I had in our marriage. Not that I had big struggles, but these are normal things when you're young and going through those major life changes. And would he prefer her? Would he forget about me? And now I will say that I have let go of a lot of those fears. I have let go of a lot of that. And
maybe that
I
was
no longer.
well, maybe that was think about it. When I think that the comment doesn't exist, maybe in a moment of clarity or a moment of regret, you might have deleted the comment, possibly. I'm not sure. Like I have to check that video, but I can see where, because I really felt something from that comment. I really did. And it prompted me to have you write me about that. And okay, so you've kind of, I don't want to say evolved, but the panic is not there anymore.
The panic is not there. And I think there's a few things that I've really been made to be acutely aware of. One is pride as a primary vice. So again, I'm Catholic. I talk a lot about vices and passions and things like that. That pride is essentially a refusal to allow God to work in you because you believe that you know what is best and that you have the tools to survive. And so pride is one of those vices that is actually somewhat impossible to ever master. Humility, only our Lord and our Blessed Mother were truly humble. Our Lord Jesus, that is. Not to, but I'm just clarifying a little bit. As far as people who are humans. Because pride is essentially a survival instinct, we cannot actually master our pride. We cannot actually master the virtue of humility. And so I really started digging down into pride and attachment and all of those concepts and issues that I was facing in that moment because of fear of being forgotten by earthly creatures, a fear of being less preferred to another person, a fear of any of that is pride. That's pride. And so really kind of trying to tear myself away from that vice, which is, I mean, it like, once I really started exploring my own pridefulness, I realized that my pride holds me up in the morning. I mean, I am so like that. It's like a tangly web of like a tangly thorns all over my body. And I can't really move spiritually without playing this constant whack-a-mole where I'm just always smacking down pride. And it's gotten to the point where I was talking to a priest who said, it's almost funny, to be honest, like you almost have to laugh at it, like just how absurd these vices are for us because it's so obvious. And so I got to a place where I thought, I don't know what my husband is going to do. And that's not my cross at all. That is his cross to bear. I do know that whatever God has in store for him is for his good and for the good of our family. Complete trust in his decisions from here on out, or his decisions when it comes to his life. If I meet an untimely death, which is not a guarantee, it's just something that we're thinking about. And so I've kind of like come to rest in that and see this as more of my own battle against my own attachment to my life. I don't know, like my earthly life. And so I think that's where, we kind of are. And I really started thinking about the nature of marriage and what God's plan for marriage is and what, essentially this sacrament is in our life. And when we go back to the Garden of Eden, God gives Eve to Adam for his own good. It is not good for man to be alone. But the word good is important there because I think we have a distorted idea in our culture of what good is. And it might be, I think it was like Budweiser back in the 80s that was always talking about the good life. Was that Budweiser in like the 90s? I forget. It was some beer.
I remember, but I forget exactly what brand it was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they, they were like, you have to live the good life, and which is, drinking beer and watching TV and playing sports or, all these kind of recreational activities. And that's not, from a biblical perspective, that is not what good means. And I don't know what the actual translation of the, I could go back and, read and try to figure out like a better translation for that word. But when we talk about good, we are in the church or in scripture, we are talking about the good for the soul. And so these are men that are not called to the priesthood. But it's the same thing. But in marriage, what is good for men is that they must bear the cross that is their wife. And she will assist them in their spiritual journey to heaven. So I came to this point where it's like, okay, if my husband, again, if this is an untimely death and he decides to remarry, if he must take on another helpmeet, and a helpmeet in assisting him to get to heaven. It's not his helpmeet to like make his coffee in the morning, although I think that's part of marriage for sure. But it's not a servant role, it's an assistance in your spiritual development. And I cannot stand in the way of God's will in that and the charity there. So that would be a total lack of charity on my part if I wanted my husband to, first of all, not be happy and, have a partnership, but also to not allow his spiritual development.
We talk about theological issues here quite a bit. So this is fitting in with the theme of this channel. And we talk about male-female dynamics and marriage and divorce and the single life and Christianity and spirituality. And so this is not foreign to my audience. They're probably shaking their head, affirming what you are saying as you are talking.
Yeah, good. Yeah, because I think these concepts are very lost on people now, especially, I would say, suffering as anything but a negative. And so I think our culture wholesale has lost its ability to bear suffering and to actually welcome suffering at a certain point, which we know from all the great saints that you will not grow without suffering. And that could be major suffering, that could be, stage 4 cancer when you're 41 years old, or it could just be these little inconveniences that add up. St. John of the Cross says that God will provide us all of the suffering we need in order to go straight to heaven if we allow it into our lives. And if we offer up that suffering and allow it to purify us, that he will supply all of it. And we don't have to be fearful of what will come. It doesn't necessarily have to be some major, something shockingly terrible. When we decided to marry each other, I had no idea that marriage was actually that I was supposed to in any way sacrifice. Like I thought it was like, oh, he's going to sacrifice for me. And he probably thought the same thing about me. He's like, okay, now we're married and she's going to do everything I want. And I'm like, he'll do everything I want. And I think we enter into this union with the idea that we're seeking happiness and completeness and all of those things, which is wonderful. And your spouse in an ideal world, they would provide that for you out of charity and love. But we all know that that's not the case. And I think where a lot of marriages fail is actually in the before they even start. It's in the dating process and it's in the expectations of what their marriage will look like. Didn't start dating and we knew each other. We hung out a little bit, but then we didn't start actually dating until a year later. And then we got engaged 4 months after that and then got married a year after that. So it was kind of a slow beginning, but a fast courtship, I'd say. So.
Nobody ever, when people meet, nobody ever, they think about all the good times that they're going to have together and they have those in their head, but nobody ever thinks about the bad times or the threats or the things that can happen, the sicknesses, in traditional wedding vows, we say in sickness and in health. Was that in your wedding vows, in sickness and in health?
Yes. So I was Episcopalian-ish. My father's from England, so he was raised Anglican, and we attended an Episcopal church. Although my spiritual journey is kind of crazy. Well, there's a lot of details there, but anyway, we were raised in I was married in an Episcopal church, and the priest was actually very, very buttoned up. He was British, and he was a little older, but yeah, we did the traditional vows. And I'm trying to remember. I mean, yeah, in sickness and in health was in there. I'm trying to exactly remember what the Episcopal vows were at the time. But yes, I mean, for better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and in health. And I think especially for Catholic marriages, what can be something that people need to think about if they are entering into a Catholic marriage where they will not be using birth control and will presumably have a large family, God willing, you need to also think about sickness, the sickness of your children, the sickness of your parents, but especially children. Because once you start having 5, 6, 7, 8 kids, you are statistically very likely to face pregnancy loss, child loss, prematurity, genetic diseases. And I've seen that many times in my circle of friends. And I think that's one of those marriage prep items that people should be talking about. What are we going to do if we face something like this? How, what will the plan be? Like, how can we accommodate, that into our marriage? And you're right. I mean, people don't think about this stuff. And I think it's such a pathological fear that many people die with no funeral plans, no estate plan, no will, no nothing. It's like we just deny that anybody's ever going to get sick or to make any difficult decisions. And it causes a lot of pain and suffering and end of life and in disease in general. So, but certainly those situations, those very hard, illnesses or diseases can tear marriages apart. And we know that happens all the time, especially I think when women get sick. I think especially that can result in a failed marriage because it's just overwhelming for their husbands,
Yeah, there's a lot of statistics about that.
Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, I've seen the statistics. I do wonder how many of those, I don't know if I've ever seen clarity on whether or not the husbands are the ones that are filing for divorce or if the woman decides. Because I do think like with breast cancer or something, most women, I'm young to have breast cancer, but most women are postmenopausal when they reach menopause. And so they could be empty nesters. And it could be something where they're like, you know what, I just went through cancer therapy and like, I don't, I have a whole new outlook on life and I don't want to be in this marriage anymore. So it could be the women, but I don't know. I know that a lot of men, I think what can happen is men sometimes feel wholly inadequate in their ability to emotionally support their wives. And I don't think that we have a lot of training on how to do this. I don't think men are trained on how to emotionally support people. I don't think women are trained in this either. But women sort of naturally, or I don't know. I mean, I don't want to get anybody's feathers ruffled. I like to think a lot of these things are natural, but it could be societal expectations. But I think women have just better support systems in general. We all know this. So I think when a woman gets sick, it ends up in a failed marriage. And if the man is the one who leaves, either physically or emotionally, if he just checks out, I do wonder if that is after years of that man feeling wholly inadequate in every way when it comes to alleviating his wife's suffering or pain or emotional issues. And if he just is overwhelmed because of his feelings of inadequacy. I do think that men have this deep shame response that women perhaps don't. I think women are more apt to be afraid of abandonment, whereas I think men can experience deep shame. That's what I've seen, at least with men I know. And so I wonder if that's what happens with that. But yeah, I mean, it's statistically, it's a thing. And I think as a society, we need to kind of unravel what's going on with this. I just think as a society, we don't care enough about marriage to look into it. So,
it's interesting that you say that, because these issues are rarely mentioned in premarital counsel that couples may go to. I know I had said to a former fiance that when we are married, the reality is that we are probably going to be seeing each other. Well, it'll be a fact that we're going to be seeing each other through the death of our parents. Mm-hmm. That's going to be one of the first things that happens is our parents dying. And that wasn't a fun thought for her, I don't think. I think a lot of times, and for me, was thinking, for a second marriage, I just want to talk about everything,
right.
as I'm approaching a second marriage. For her, it would be her first marriage. And I think a lot of times first marriage people are very idealistic. They don't want to talk about death. I mean, they'll say stuff like, I don't want to talk about death right now. Let's talk about the possibilities in the future. And I'm like, that actually is something that can happen. And will we be able to deal with it? I'm not focusing on the negative. It's just that I think, and it's not the 800-pound gorilla in the room either. It's just something that needs to be addressed. And then plan for it. Like you said, a lot of people don't plan for things like that. But what are you going to do if you get the call that a parent has passed away? What are you going to do if you get the call that a child has passed away? What are you going to do if you get the call that you have stage 4 cancer? And that leads me to my next question. When you found that out, Jenny, what was your initial response? Like, it's not like, well, we found a little bit of cancer. They found stage 4 cancer.
So it was wild, actually. So I, again, had been breastfeeding or pregnant for 14 years. And I had never actually had a break from breastfeeding. So I would breastfeed and then get pregnant and continue to breastfeed till well into each pregnancy, and then eventually wean the baby, So, and not to get too, personal about this, but like when women are breastfeeding, their breasts go through tremendous changes. Like it's, daily, like, I had a strange lump in my breast that was diagnosed as a galactocele, which is a cyst. It's like a milk cyst, but it was quite big. And that had been there for, since my first child was born. I have no idea if that galactocele was formed because there was a little bit of cancer there, or if the galactocele in some way, they say that they don't cause cancer. I don't know. But it's weird because it's the exact same spot where the primary breast cancer is. So I had been so used to this galactocele. And then during the quarantines, at the very beginning of the COVID quarantines, I noticed that there was like kind of a dent, what looked like a dent. And I'm going to be specific about this because I think women, if there are any women or any men that are seeing this video, this was like a crease. It wasn't a dimple. So it did not look like, when you look up dimpling breasts or you look up breast cancer, the pictures you see are not what this looked like. It looked like a crease. If your spouse or you notice this in your breast, you must get that checked out immediately. I had no idea that it was a sign of cancer. I just thought I had this galactocele and it was causing damage to the breast tissue. So I actually mentioned it. I got pregnant and I mentioned it at my first appointment with my midwife, who was like, I wouldn't worry about it. You could get a mammogram if you want. Which, looking back on it, in some sense, I'm glad that I was not diagnosed during pregnancy, because that would have been, I can't imagine the overwhelm of going through cancer treatment during pregnancy. I can't imagine it. And all of those choices. I don't know if I would have chosen to go through a therapy that could have hurt my baby. Like, I don't know. And it would have put an awkwardness, I think, for her forever. Like, I'm the kid that's mom had cancer when she was pregnant and didn't get treatment. Cause anyway, so I went through, I had the baby, and then a full, it was like maybe 9 months later, I had this random severe rib pain. I'm sorry if I'm going into too much detail about this, by the way, because we don't have
That's
to.
okay.
Okay.
It's gonna talk to somebody.
Yeah, I had this random rib pain that was debilitating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I'm an opera singer. Well, I mean, I'm a classical singer, but I was supposed to premiere an opera a couple weeks after this rib pain happened, and they had to like change my costume because I couldn't wear a corset because it hurt too much. And I did see a doctor. I saw a surgeon, and he actually did say, there's a chance it could be metastatic cancer. Do you have any lumps in your breast? And I was like, well, I have something that looks really weird at my breast. I am breastfeeding. And he's like, it's nothing. So it was just this, I'm like, the absurdity of just being like, oh, you can't be breastfeeding and have breast cancer at the same time. Like, that's absurd. But apparently that's a problem, and that I don't know. I mean, multiple doctors kind of dismissed this. So I went through the opera, and then after that, I thought, I need to get this looked at. So I did go to another doctor, and he was like, yeah, I'm not feeling anything. Like, you could get a mammogram, but it'll light up like a Christmas tree because you're breastfeeding. So for people that don't know, because there's calcium in breast milk, if you get a mammogram while you're breastfeeding, the calcium will light up, and it'll be hard to distinguish cancer and normal breast tissue, or milky breast tissue rather. So that is difficult, but that does not mean that you should not get a mammogram when you're breastfeeding, because they might be able to find something. They can do an ultrasound. Like, just get a mammogram if you think you have breast cancer. They are not painful. They take like 5 minutes. Some people think they're painful. I will say, if you're breastfeeding a baby, you probably are used to much worse breast pain than a mammogram. So don't be afraid, just go do it. So anyway, I eventually weaned that baby, and I went and I actually went and saw my family doctor, who's usually takes care of our children. And she took one look at my breast and got me in with a breast surgeon like the next day. So then I went to the clinic up here, and I had, the diagnostic mammogram, an ultrasound. I had 7 biopsies, I think, of that, maybe 5 biopsies right away. And the radiologist, when she saw my initial mammogram, came in and said, this is absolutely cancer. Because it was just, the abnormality was so severe. And I actually had cancer in both breasts at that point. So we went through a round of all of the testing and everything was very rushed because the tumor was quite large in the initial tumor was very big. And then we found out some good news that the tumors were estrogen positive and progesterone positive, which is wonderful, because then if you cut estrogen, it can kill the cancer for a little while anyway. So that's preferable. And also, the cancer is not a particularly aggressive cancer. It's just been there a long time, which is good. So, I had to go in then for a CT scan. It was actually a PET CT. And one of my very closest family friends, the husband is a doctor. He's a radiologist, actually. And I sent, of course, like nowadays, you get a PET scan and it comes on your cell phone. Like, the results of your PET scan just show up as like a text message, essentially. And I had told myself I would not read the results of the PET scan, but I did. And I realized that I had metastatic cancer, and I sent it to my friend who's a radiologist, who explained the results to me over the phone. And then, you know, we met with our oncologist the next day. And it was kind of funny because I think my husband and I, we both, like, in times of like serious stress, like we both just like, we're just very calm. We're very calm. And so my oncologist, I think, was a little like, she was like, you know, these appointments usually take 2 days. Like, you guys are really chill about this. But I would say in that moment, oh, I left out an important detail. They also found a metastasis on, so I had metastases in most of my bones and liver and ovaries. My doctor was, you know, she said, if it's stage 4 breast cancer, there's a lot we can do. And I'm very hopeful about that. But you do have what appears to be a metastasis on your ovary, which could be a secondary primary cancer. You could have ovarian cancer as well as breast cancer, especially if you have a genetic predisposition, which I do not. But we didn't know that yet. And so I think in that moment, like, just to answer your question, how did I feel? Well, I was like, okay, I'm going to be dead in a couple months. It looks like I might have, you know, stage 4 cancer of an unknown origin. We know that it's most likely breast cancer, but the metastases on the ovary, a lot of people I don't think that's like generally a place that you get metastases like in a regularly, especially with invasive ductal carcinoma. So I thought, you know what, I mean, if I have secondary primary ovarian cancer, I mean, this is it. And I hate to say this because it sounds crazy, but I was actually had this feeling of a strange feeling of gratitude. I would say that most of my emotions in that time was just like this just profound sorry, I'm going to start crying, but like, I couldn't imagine how women who are not supported and not loved and are not Catholic could possibly receive information like that. And I just realized in that moment, I was like, I have this amazing husband. I have these beautiful children. I have my parents and all of these people who love me so profoundly in this amazing community. And these physicians that I could see the next day. Like, I had a doctor that got me in the next day at a world-class breast cancer clinic. I live in Chicago. I have access to the best of all healthcare. And also, God is giving me an opportunity to right my ship, to like join with him and suffer with him in this kind of immediate way. Because I think I was Catholic. I was a devout Catholic. I always went to mass. I never, I avoided mortal sins, and I accepted all of the church teachings, but I did not have a deep sense of, I was not really spiritually growing, I would say, like, I mean, maybe a little bit. But in that moment, I was just like, okay, I must do this now. And it was like such a lightning bolt when I realized God is using this for my spiritual benefit. And it felt so powerful. And I felt that he saw how important my soul was. And he was showing me that. And that was my feeling, actually. And I was obviously really scared, but not so much scared of, I was scared of the pain, and like what could be a very painful death. But I think, yeah, kind of the overwhelming feeling was just of like, just how wonderful everyone is in my life. And so, yeah, so that's
and then this worry started. I mean,
yeah. So that was for the first 3 months.
And I witnessed you saying, is my husband going to remarry? What's going to happen to my clothes? Is she going to like throw my clothes out?
Yeah.
How is she going to relate to my children? And of course, like I said, that really, when I started reading more, I'm like, wow, I can imagine the thoughts that were going through your head. And I had sent you Father Josiah Trenum's teaching on when a spouse dies. And I have been a big believer in marriage for life. That's how I am. If, I am divorced, but if I was married and my wife passed away, that would be it for me. That's just my personal belief. I'm done. I'm not going to fill that side of the bed, quickly. That's just not going to happen. And one of your concerns was being replaced. Talk about
and
that.
so, okay, so that happened. So I was actually like, I was doing really well for the first 3 months or so after my diagnosis. And like we were, yeah, I mean, I felt great. I felt so kind of, I was, I had this deep sense of spiritual growth. I have a spiritual director. It was just, I was, just in these deep places of prayer. And I think as these things go, the spiritual development is not quite that's not an easy task. It's not easy. And I think like, if anything, I think I was just actually punched in the face by the devil. So there were a series of things that happened where I spoke to somebody who was a widower or a woman, and she is young and is very, very eager to remarry and like kind of like actively trying to remarry, which is wonderful for her. But and I think that was really strange. Like in that moment, I was like, wow, like, it just, I guess I hadn't even really thought about the reality of that. Does that make sense? Because after I was diagnosed with cancer, I said to my husband, I was like, you need to get remarried. Like you need to be happy. Like, please do that. And he was actually kind of hurt by that, which I think makes sense because he felt like I was kind of dismissing it. Like, you'll be fine, just like remarry. And but yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but I do believe, like, I think it was some sort of a demonic attack, because when I started obsessing, and I was obsessing over this, like it was an obsession, which is usually a sign of something demonic, by the way. If you're obsessing over a topic, and I'm not trying to scare people if don't like run out and go get an exorcism or something, but that kind of like obsessive thinking is often some sort of demonic attack that can be kind of relieved with prayers, or maybe seeing a priest can do some deliverance prayers and things like that. But because what it did is it disoriented me away from where I was going. So I was trying to get closer to God, and then, as the devil will do, he will always attack you through your vocation. So if your vocation is the married life, you will be spiritually attacked through your vocation. If you are a priest, you will be spiritually attacked through your vocation. And same if you're a nun or a religious of any sort. So in that moment, the curse of Eve comes up and is like roaring its head. And like, what is the curse of Eve? The curse of Eve is a woman, first of all, pain in childbirth and like pain with rearing children. So that's number one, right? Because I'm afraid of what will happen to my children. This is not, in my interpretation of the curse of Eve, is not that it's just pregnancy and childbirth. It is the pain of being a mom. Being a mother is very stressful. It's very painful. And it weighs on you, I think, more. I'm not trying to dismiss the role of fathers, but I think that mothers have more of a sense of anxiety around their children than men do. I think fathers have that kind of clarity about what the children ought to do. And they don't seem to be, I mean, maybe they are tortured. They don't seem to be quite as tortured as the mothers are. So the curse of Eve is, the children are, you're going to have pain with child rearing. So if I die, what's going to happen to my children? What's going to happen to my children? What's going to, like, that's right there. And you will seek your husband, and he will rule over you. So that's the other curse. And some people say they're not actually curses. I don't know. It's not exactly a curse. I'm going to say curse for now, because that's kind of the language that I'm used to with that. But with this weight on this sort of propensity towards sinfulness in a married woman will come out in relationship to her husband and her vocation. And so the clever devil, or whatever demon was after me, which I truly believe it was demonic, very cleverly sort of grabbed that attachment that I have to my husband and pulled me back to earth with it, and pulled me right down to the ground where I couldn't access God in those moments. I was too upset and I was scared. Then I kind of fell into this deep shame, because I knew this was uncharitable of me, and I knew it showed a lack of faith in God, and I knew it showed that I was that I lacked hope. So then I started developing this deep sense of shame, which is actually from pride, and it just was this like a spiritual, just like everything just kind of fell apart. I mean, not that I was still praying, I was still doing all of my Christian duties and stuff, but it was definitely like a big that was definitely like somebody just ripped me away from that. And that is what these attachments are. This is what an attachment to sin is. And, you know, I mean, I think that's what happened in that moment. I mean, I do think this is something that we maybe should explore in our culture, because spouses dying young is not as common as it used to be. So in the 19th century, your wife died in childbirth, you got a new wife. Like, what did that look like? Today, second marriages are almost always divorce, or because of a divorce. And so I think that we, as a culture, and especially in this world, this like strange world of widowers and second wives, and you know, this place, there is this idea that your dead spouse is your ex-spouse, and that there's an adversarial relationship.
Yeah. The dead spouse is a late spouse, not an ex-spouse.
I mean, so many marriages end in divorce. And I would say the vast majority of stepmothers or stepfathers are stepping into a marriage where the partner is divorced. And so that's why we use that language. And, 150 years ago or whatever, this was unthinkable. People did not get divorced and remarried. I mean, very few of them, but a lot of people died young. A lot of women died in childbirth. And so I think that sort of, there's like a kind of a cultural misunderstanding of the place of that woman, I would say, in the life of the man, and that, the dead spouse is not a threat to the now spouses. She's not, in any way. She's not there. She's gone. She's a, hopefully in heaven, but she's not a threat. And it's interesting because in the Catholic world, I think that I do know one woman who married a man who was widowed. And it's actually just the sweetest story, although the death of his first wife was very tragic. And so she died of cancer. She had a baby, brand new baby. And, obviously this is just, he was, devastated, and he's raising a child by himself. And a priest actually, after 2 years that he was raising this child alone, or, whatever amount of time, called a man that he knew who had a daughter in her late 20s, who was a faithful Catholic, this beautiful, wonderful woman. And he said, would your daughter be willing to go on a date with this man? And so the father talked to her, and he said, at first, I guess she was like, no, that seems like I can't, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that. They started dating. And then at a certain point, he said to her, I want you to meet my daughter, my little daughter, who was a toddler at the time. And she said, well, I'll meet her, but know that I'm not going anywhere if I meet that poor motherless child. She's like, I know myself. I take one look at that kid and I'm here for life, and I'm not going down without a fight, kind of thing. And he's like, no. Yes, that's absolutely where where we're going. I just want to I just want you to meet her first. And so then they got married and have many, 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 many children. And it's,
a beautiful story.
It is a beautiful story. And so I think that that's, the reality of, at least in a properly formed Catholic woman, that is how they will view their role in this marriage. And of course, the spouse who is alive is the one that the husband needs to sacrifice for. And so I do think it's important for widowers to, be able to be fully present to their current wife, and not, I guess, go into that confidently, I suppose. Although I'm not a second wife, I'm a first wife. So I don't know. I don't have any real opinions about this. I mean, I guess I have a lot of opinions. I don't have any authority. I don't have any experience with it, except from the perspective of somebody that might be on the other side of that. So but it is interesting. And I saw a lot of really nasty stuff on the internet, actually, like in my obsession about this, where, with women throwing things away that belong to the deceased spouse, and being frustrated that their widowed husbands, want to visit the gravesite of their spouse, or talk about her with children, or have a picture of her up in the house. And we actually don't have any pictures of me in our home, because we don't actually have pictures of people. We have icons and, art and stuff like that, but we don't have pictures of people. But, and not that I think that a dead spouse should be displayed all over a house, but I think that's an interesting expectation, because we don't demand that pictures of our deceased grandmothers are taken down, or our friends. And so I do think there's that kind of push-pull, because when you are simply a friend or a grandmother or a mother, you're not really replaceable. I think what's tricky with marriage is it is this profound sacrament that is over when you die. And it's something that we don't explore a lot of, right? I think the most important thing is the gravity that of spousal loss is so severe. It's such a profound and horrible experience that, my role is to tell my husband to do what he needs to do to be a holy and good father. And whatever avenue he chooses needs to be entirely his own choosing. And he should not go into that with any sense of guilt, because I'm not going to care. If I'm in heaven, hopefully, pray for me. I am not going to be up there like mad and jealous about some new woman. Like, that's not how that works at all. And so, the way that we feel because of our natural emotions on earth and our very human issues is not how we will feel in heaven. And so there should be zero guilt on anyone's part. I do think widowers they need to think about their children and their relationship with their children. And not that the children should dictate their actions, but that I think they should, if they want to have a healthy relationship with their children, they should definitely consider who it is that they're marrying very strongly. Because I do believe that any woman that comes into a man's life loves that man completely. She loves his family, she loves his children, she loves his friends. And if there's a point of contention there, that needs to be worked out before you get married.